back. Welcome back to Open Your Eyes. We're moving now into our first segment for the morning. Conversation we've been looking forward to. Then again, it's with the union's opinion on proposed salary cuts to G.O.B. Officers. Now, in with us to talk about it, we have Gerald Henry, who is the president of the Public Service Union, and also Sharon Fraser, who is the president of the Association of Public Sector Senior Managers. Guys, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, John.
Good morning.
Marlene.
And we want to jump directly into this conversation. I mean, we've been hearing about it, but at the same time, we know what the current situation is across the country and across the world, actually. And I'd like to get your thoughts. Let's start with you, Mr. President, Mr. Henry, in terms of what the financial situations are at this particular point and what the unions are expecting.
All right. I would like to say good morning once again to yourself, John. Marlene, congratulations on your new appointment as CEO. I actually didn't expect to see you on air this morning, but it's still a pleasure to see you, of course, no? So John, as it relates to the proposed salary cuts, in the discussion that we had with the team from the government, not the government side, there was no discussion as it relates to anything having to do with salary cuts. I want to say that first of all. No, I'm not sure if Sister Fraser had that same experience, but from the PSU side, we had no discussions relating to that specific topic. But what I would like to say about it, though, is that I think we have also been hearing that the government has been saying that they are going to or have taken a 10% cut themselves. Now, whether that is a precursor to us or to suggesting that they will be coming to public officers for a salary cut, I cannot say. But one of the things that I certainly want to see if I can bring some comfort to our public officers is that one of the things that certainly came out with in our meeting with the government is that the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister made a statement that it was such a distinct statement that the Minister of Education wrote down the phrase that he used, no, and it spoke to that whatever actions that will be taken must be equitable, right? And he mentioned that that word certainly stood out in my mind. And if it is that they are going to or have taken a 10% salary cut, then certainly the equity would demand that public officers would not be required to take the same quantum of salary cut, no? They would have to take less than 10%. And so if that would bring some sort of relief to our public officers, because we have been hearing numbers calling out such as 15% and all the way up to 20%, right? So that is pretty much all I would have to say about that at this time. Considering, like I said, we had no discussion on a salary cut.
Yeah. Was it something that was just off the table? Because when you go into the budget consultations, the expectation is that you talk through all the possible options.
If I can respond to that.
Go ahead.
While it is, from our perspective, they highlighted the almost $500 million deficit in the budget. Like with the meetings with PSU, there wasn't a definite discussion on salary cuts. Clearly, though, we were left with the understanding that the deficit needs to be closed. The issue of the bloated salary, money spent on salary was discussed, but in terms of percentage And it's not because we didn't ask. We asked what, if they had any idea of what it is they were looking at, and that at all was not raised. In fact, the last thing that was said was that all the recommendations, all the suggestions would be taken to cabinet and they would have follow-up meetings so that in fact this consultation process that they've engaged in will continue before a final decision is going to be taken. In fact, one of the things we asked for was show us the figures, give us the data, give us what we need so that we can do for ourselves the analysis of the figures and to see what is going to work or what will not work or what will, in terms of, I know constantly you've been hearing about the cost saving measures that we have recommended, and our take was show us the figures. That is the only way, because I know that I heard the Prime Minister say that, oh, the cost saving measures will, my words, be a drop in the bucket. It won't bring the deficit any closer. But we don't know that. We don't know that because we have not been shown the figures. I know that for the longest while, the unions and President Henry can attest to the fact that we've been asking for those measures that have already been taken. We've been asking, show us what is the result of it. And we really have not gotten it, but this is the time that in fact they could very well show us what those figures are. We can do the analysis, we can see the figures, and then after the figures are being shown, we see where the deficit still is, and then we can consider other suggestions and make other suggestions and recommendations. So I can say that, in fact, like President Henry, that any talk of any percentage of salary cut was really discussed with us, except what is the financial situation of the country.
Sorry, yeah. I'd imagine that even if the government hasn't presented a proposal of salary cuts, that you internally perhaps have been discussing what you are willing or not willing to accept. I know, Gerald, in previous conversations with the PSU, you've said right here on this show that it's not something that you don't acknowledge may have to be done. Is there a formula in your mind that you think people would be more amenable to accepting? And I mean the members of your unions.
Right. Yes. Sister Fraze, I from the PSU perspective, the only way that I see that our members would be amenable would be that all efforts outside of salary cuts would have to be taken first now, meaning that all of our recommendations for the cost savings measures and the revenue enhancement practices and so on would have to be implemented first. Reason being that if those are not done, then the brunt of the gap that as Sister Fraser mentioned a while ago that needs to be filled would have to come from the salaries of public officers. However, let's say that amounts to 20%. However, if the cost savings measures and revenue enhancement measures were put into place, then that gap would be narrowed down whatever figure, but they have to prove it, as Sister Fraser mentioned, which was also PSU's position, that they have to give us the figures in order for us to do our own analysis, and then we could present those to our membership in order to get the buy-in that would be necessary, to sort of cushion the blow to our public officers, no? But certainly that's the only considerations that we would have. First and foremost, to even start thinking about the salary cuts. So there is not necessarily a formula that we are looking at. It's just that we need to have all of those recommendations implemented first of all. Then we see what those produce, how much it closes the gap, and then we move on to considering what would be done, on the public officers, stand from the public officers standpoint to close the rest of the gap.
Ms. Shar, would you share the same sentiment in terms of a formula to curb this one with the group that you represent?
Well, we didn't look at the formula either. Our position was that we needed the empirical data. We needed to look to see of all the things that have been proposed, what it is going to how close it's going to fill the gap, and thereafter then we look at the other options. We are not hard and fast as a union and association on the fact that there shouldn't be any salary cuts. We have acknowledged that a huge portion of the budget is spent on salaries. We acknowledge that. We're not running away from that. But in fact, the general position of our members is that and remember that is not our first position, it is the last position that in fact we would want to consider. But if it's done, while there are persons talking about cutting it across the board, we also are considering the adverse action that it would have on public officers at the lower salary brackets, so that it might cause an additional economic burden on the society if it is that cross the board cut might take place. So if it is it comes to that, I would hope that the government sit with us and speak to us in relation to a formula or an implementation process or policy, because it can't be that, in fact, as I said, you need to set some thresholds.
Yes.
As far as that is concerned, rather than across the board, since in our view, it would severely affect the lower ranks of the service. So we are not running away from it. In fact, when the last time they proposed cuts, HODs willingly gave up, decided, in fact, they were prepared to give up 100% of a particular allowance. I'm not going to call the name of the allowance because people have misread what the allowance is about, but they were willing to give it up, providing certain things were put in place. So we are being responsible. We are looking at, clearly, we don't want any public officer to be sent home. So that is why we're prepared to be an active partner in trying to figure out how to bring this $500 million deficit down. So we are prepared.
I'm glad you mentioned the issue of a threshold, because very often, and you know this is a public debate that is ongoing when you talk about whether or not there should be a salary cut for public officers. And you can get examples from both ends. You can get people who are on the higher end of the pay scale, who from outside looking in, people say, okay, they can manage with a cut. And then you have the stories of people on the lower end of the pay scale who you can only imagine that with a 10, a 15, or 20% cut may end up having to apply for some of the same assistance programs that the government has to pay for as well. So recognizing that it's not the same reality for all is a key factor here. But you sat with the ministers and the team that led the discussion. Do you get a sense of openness to work out this solution together?
Well, I did. From the group that went to the minister, I would say that the meeting went very well. They were open. They listened. They didn't give up too much information, except for the state of the economy, but they listened And of course, I want to emphasize the promise that was given to us by the Deputy Prime Minister of consultation and continued consultation, so that any decision that is to be taken, it would mean that they would then come back to the union, and the promise was rather than separately, together, so that in fact there is no misconception of what one is saying or the whole issue of the divide and conquer rule that is also floating out there. So I'm hoping that they all seem to be honorable men that will stand behind their promise, and that at short quarters after their consultation, they'll be coming back to us in terms of what they have come up with and how we can work together. This is a team effort. And it's not that as public officers, especially senior managers, we are not aware of the economic situation. We're very much aware of it. And we know the time has come now to look at certain things that we have been clamoring for years. So it doesn't have necessarily rest on one administration over the other. We've been asking for certain things for years, like for instance, salary register to know the amount of public officers that have been is employed or are employed, sorry, by the public service, because that is what is also affecting the size of the budget in terms of salary of paying to public officers. At the same time, if you do what is known as a desk audit, it might also weed out some of the double payments, the ghost workers, the other things that we know exist, except it seemed on some quarters to be taboo, right? So it's not that we are not aware. Public office, we are aware.
Yeah.
But this is the time now to extensively look at these issues in order to bring this deficit small as best as we can.
Let's look at some of the measures that we think might be working. I'd like to ask both of you your piece in this, because you guys have both made recommendations to our folks, but at the same time, are they taking these recommendations, and what are the ones that you feel are working? Let's start with you, Mr. Henry.
I am not certain exactly which ones they have actually implemented at this point, John. It was not revealed to us as far as my recollection goes now. All that was said was that, as Sister Fraser mentioned a while ago, that whatever they were looking at in terms of the cost savings, I don't think they were referring to the revenue enhancement side, because they were focusing on expenditure. But the Prime Minister had mentioned that I believe it was 1% that it would accumulate to now. So we wish that we would have been seeing some of the more visible approaches or recommendations that we made, such as the vehicles being parked and so on, government vehicles, that don't require, or the post that they are assigned to is not an emergency officer or someone who would need to get up in the wee hours of the night and attend to some issue that is happening now. That those would be parked, that maybe we could see some carpooling start to happen. Those things like that would be visible to us. We're just not seeing that. I continue to see vehicles on the highways with family members loaded in the vehicle on the weekends. So unfortunately, like I said, we're not seeing those things happening as yet.
Sharon?
Okay, so if I can add, in terms of the cost saving measures, since I've been involved in this process from day one, and I want to tell you that the cost saving measures and the committee and the revenue enhancement was in fact a recommendation coming out of the unions. the joint unions. So I will definitely take credit for the unions coming up with that. Why, in fact, this would have worked is because the very officers who are working the system were the persons giving the recommendations on how we could have closed up the gaps, how we could have saved money. Simple things like turning off lights once leaving the office was a simple thing. When you look at the electricity bill, when you look at the telephone bills, and yes, from the cost saving measures, some of the suggestions have been taken. For example, the phone, the issue of the phone, they had implemented a card system. Now, what is the savings? That I cannot tell you because that was not shared with us. In relation to fuel for government vehicles, those recommendations was also taken when in fact they implemented the card system, so that you were given a card attached to a vehicle and attached to a person. So you needed to put in a specific code, and that way they could trace. And I will tell you, because it has happened to me, somebody who is assigned to a government vehicle, if it is that you put in the wrong code, or it is that the mileage is not matching up with the amount of fuel that you got, it will reject it. It will reject your card. Not that that is what happened to me. It was a putting in error in terms of the mileage. But that has been put in place. What has been the savings, I cannot tell you, because that has not been shared with us. So I can identify two particular areas in which, coming out of the cost savings report, the first cost saving report, there have been three. They've implemented some things. Others, I'm not sure. There might have been others that have been implemented, and we just are not aware of what they are, despite the fact that we repeatedly were asking for them. In terms of revenue enhancement, we made several suggestions on how it is we could close the gap, we could increase revenue enhancement. One of them was looking at the whole tax structure in terms of collection. Imagine, and I will use myself as an example. I'm an attorney by trade, sitting as chief magistrate, right? So I'm a public officer. I pay 25% income tax, personal income tax, while my colleagues who have come back same time with me, same training, pay 6%.
Wow.
So it's not equal, right? And that's because I'm giving to the service. I'm giving to the public, and I am paying 25%, right? So that is one of the suggestions we had made, and a continuous. Now, one could debate until King Hatchet turned back a hammer in relation to that, but I'm just giving you examples. One of our members from APSSM gave the suggestion, and we gave that to the ministers, of imposing a road user. You know, like you go to the States and there is a toll, and monies that are collected from that could go towards road maintenance. We've given that suggestion. It can work. There was a study that was done, and that can also help that we can that money can be used, rather than taking out money out of the consolidated funds to fix roads. You've heard constantly since this new administration have come in about the neglect of roads and whatever. We've spent millions of dollars on roads, and we have nothing set aside for maintenance of those roads. Right? And you might say, well, why is that important? Road deals with trade deal with earning of money, and you can work it. You can work it to see how it affects every single person if the roads are not proper, because it means that persons have to spend more money on their vehicles. It means that business persons they will attach whatever cost it is to their transportation cost, to the cost of goods, And I can go on in relation to that, but I just wanted you to know that we've been making suggestions. This suggestion of this road user fee has been around since 2019. I think that is when they told me that the study was done. So there are things that, yes, it might not be immediate, but it could be medium, going into the medium long term
Yeah.
solution to enhancing revenue and taking less out of the consolidated funds, right? And making the pie a little bit easier to distribute, because then you don't have to worry about certain things,
You know,
right? So those are some of the things.
and one of the things that we also hear, and not just from the unions, also from the private sector, is talking about being more aggressive with tax collection. You know, you dutifully pay your 25%, like all of us, because it's taken out of your salaries. But there are many who are very easily evade the system.
All right,
Yes, for sure.
that's true.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that that's true, and I think Brother Flowers, I don't have the numbers, but he was crunching the numbers, and you know, it wasn't looking good in terms of the amount of people who are actually paying taxes, you know, their fair share of taxes in the country right now, and I believe that you know, shortly PSU will be you know, releasing some of or sharing some of those figures after Brother Flowers has done his analysis now. But it's definitely a very critical issue that we need to look at, and there has to be at some point discussions, you know, in regards to tax reform, as Sister Fraser mentioned a while ago. You know, that it is certainly unfair and inequitable to have those who are making the most, and actually she added another category to that, which would be the fact that we are actually providing a service to this country, and we still end up paying more. Certainly that cannot be fair as well, no? And so there has to be some discussion in the future, and hopefully the very near future, to start to look at tax reform, right? And it has to be the way forward, I would believe, because you know, the revenue enhancement is actually a large part of closing that gap as well. No, it's not only the expenditure side.
Yeah. You know, it's a tough time in general, and it's also a tough time to be having this conversation. Two things I think we must acknowledge. One is that the deficit that we have today, while we can definitely agree that a contributing factor is the pandemic, the economy was not healthy pre-pandemic. So we're just, it was a devastating blow at that point. So it's important that we have a critical look of systems and structures that are either not being implemented, and one of those things is looking at the current commission of inquiry that is ongoing. And I want to give, you know, acknowledge that the unions were the one who brought this forward. You pointed out that there was this cheap sale, fire sale. I mean, in some cases, it feels like a giveaway of government assets. And you raised the flag, and hence we have the commission of inquiry. But now there are more eyes watching what's happening within the public service sector and how this is even able to happen. Gerald, you want to chime in there?
Yes, Marlene. Yeah, so certainly as you mentioned a while ago, that the pandemic did, you know, bring to light, you know, the fact that we were we were already strained in terms of the country's financial position, no? And just to link that with the previous discussion that we had about taxes, is that during the pandemic, the government was able to collect 70% of the revenues this, which 92% was from taxable revenues. We know that we need to know what accounts for the 92%, right? And whether this came from the pay as you earn, which would be our salaries and so on, or the salaries of individuals now, that that taxes are removed from. The custom and stamp duties and excise tax from fuel, which we know generates almost 50% in taxes, has been used extensively by G.O.B to meet its cash flows. Now, what portion of applies to GST, and which is based on the numbers, doesn't seem to be much, right? And so it appears that there is indeed some tax evasion that has been taking place, and that needs to be that loophole needs to be closed as quickly as possible, because there is definitely a lot of tax out there to collect. So although the government seemed to have been functioning well during the COVID pandemic, it's not adding up, right? And so we need to get some more figures and to find out exactly what is happening there, in order for us to have a more effective tax collection.
Yeah. And
that is.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, just to step off what President Henry has just said, that is very, very important, because I want to emphasize that even though we pay 25%, it's not a large percentage of taxpayers, public officers that pay tax, if you realize where the threshold is. So that for those of us who are paying, we're paying that 25%. So there is a need to step up the monitoring and the effective collection of taxes, so that we all pay our fair share. I'm in no way suggesting that the threshold should be moved. In fact, I could come up with an argument why the threshold should move higher, but that is not the purpose for that at this point. Yeah. But at least I need to highlight that. So the effective monitoring and collection and enforcement of taxes has to be at the forefront of the government, so that these write-offs and these forgiveness that they've been giving, nobody forgive me of paying 25% every year. Every year I have to file, and every year if I'm owed, they come after me. In fact, before I even get a chance to do anything, a deduction order comes to my office to take out what is owed to government. Why is that not being done for every single taxpayer out there? Right? Why are people getting write-offs? Why are people getting forgiveness when in fact we are not? These are just some of the equitable issues that I want to raise. I'm not saying that in fact people are not paying, but what I'm saying is that we need to be very equitable when it comes to the payment of tax. And if you're going to write off, in fact, this is not the time to write off anything. Not with a $500 million deficit in the budget.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, you've said a mouthful. Finally, for me, while we've got both of you on here, we know that there are a few unions throughout the country, and they'd like to definitely have some sit-downs with our authorities or the powers that be. Is there another proposed meeting, something that is together, whereby everybody could actually put their heads together, all the leaders, so we could eventually propose some more ways of how we could get this deficit dealt with?
Well, I know that the team has met with NTUCB, which is the umbrella organization for all the unions countrywide, and that would have had representation from various unions coming up with recommendations, coming up with observations. I can tell you that based on what was told to us, I know we were told that there should be follow-up meetings with the joint unions, which is PSU, APSSM, and BNTU, so that in fact, since it is primarily our membership who will be affected if there is a salary cut. So we've been promised, and I'm not sure if Gerald can attest that they were told that, but I know that that is what we were told, that there will be follow-up meetings so that, in fact, we can come together, and we're hearing what is coming out of the three unions and being able to put forward a joint position, so to speak. For this to work, we all have to be in this together. That is the only way it is going to work.
Gerald?
Right. Yes, John. Certainly, I can attest to what Sister Fraser mentioned, and it goes back to her mentioning that the meeting was definitely a very amicable meeting, and it was stated that we were going to have follow-up meetings after that initial meeting. No, whether we will be having those follow-up meetings jointly, as meaning that the three unions would be present at the same time along with the government side, was not made clear, no? But I would hope that that would be the case, simply to save time as well, right? And also in order for us to present, as Sister Fraser mentioned a while ago, a joint position on whatever came out of the government's position after that initial meeting, no? When after they present the discussion that we had to their higher ups, right, and at cabinet, no. So certainly the PSU is looking forward to having that discussion, and we are very much interested to see exactly what will come from the government side on the way forward. Hopefully, sooner better than later.
Budget, end of the financial year is quickly approaching.
Yes.
And I'd imagine if there's going to be follow-up, it'll be sooner rather than later. So we appreciate you providing this update for us this morning. Of course, this is a very critical topic for all the families that will be affected. And we also recognize just the crisis that the country is in at the moment. So we hope that you guys can work out a solution. You were going to say?
Yeah, one
sure.
of the things too that I believe we also need to get from the government is, and this will of course come in our future discussions, but I just wanted to throw it out there that the issue of what sort of relief would be provided to public officers if indeed there would be a need for a salary cut. Most of our public officers have some portion of their salaries assigned to some loan or some sort of agreement with some lending institution, and we would need to see what exactly would be the government's proposal to work with the private sector and provide some sort of relief to public officers, especially as it relates to mortgage, because we don't want to see a situation where public officers would then find themselves homeless, no? So I think that we will need to seriously start to think about that, or the government should start to look at what they would put in place to to have those sorts of discussions with the private sector as well.
All right. Well, we're so thankful to have had you guys in this morning to try to provide to us some clarity, and of course to the nation, clarity on what the current situation is when it comes to, with respect to the unions and of course government, and how we could eventually try to get this deficit down. Thank you guys so very much, and do enjoy your day. We do hope to have you back so we could continue with clearing things up. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you too.
All right, we're about to take a break. When we come back, you remember that case whereby some WPCs were told in your workplace you need to get rid of the dreadlocks? Well, that went to court, but they came out victorious. We'll be chit-chatting to two of them along with their attorneys in the next conversation. That is when we come back. Stay with us.